Marcus Thompson's journey wasn't one of silver spoons or easy paths. In fact, his story began in a small, weathered neighborhood where life was anything but glamorous. The streets were lined with modest houses, and opportunities often felt like distant dreams rather than tangible realities. But even as a child, Marcus had something that set him apart: a fire inside him, an unshakable belief that he could rise above his circumstances. Growing up, Marcus watched his parents work tirelessly to provide for their family. His father, James Thompson, spent long hours cleaning offices and scrubbing floors as a janitor. Despite the grueling nature of his job, James never complained. He carried himself with dignity, always reminding Marcus that hard work wasn't just about earning a paycheck. It was about building character. Meanwhile, Marcus's mother juggled two jobs, working as a cashier at a local grocery store during the day and sewing clothes late into the night. Together, they sacrificed everything so that Marcus and his younger sister could have a better future. Despite their financial struggles, education became the family's beacon of hope. Both James and his wife instilled in their children the importance of learning. "Knowledge is power," James would say, often quoting phrases he'd heard from books or motivational speakers on the radio. They didn't have much money for fancy schools or private tutors, but what they lacked in resources, they made up for in encouragement. Every report card with good grades was celebrated like a holiday in the Thompson household. And when Marcus showed a particular knack for math and science, his parents did everything they could to nurture his talents. School wasn't just a place for Marcus to learn, it was his escape. While other kids played video games or hung out at the park, Marcus buried himself in textbooks and experiments. He loved solving problems. Whether it was figuring out complex equations or tinkering with old electronics, he found at yard sales. By the time he reached high school, Marcus had earned a reputation as the quiet kid who always had his nose in a book. Some classmates teased him for being different, but Marcus didn't care. He knew he was working toward something bigger. When Marcus graduated at the top of his class, his hard work paid off in ways his family could only dream of. Scholarships poured in, allowing him to attend prestigious universities without burdening his parents with tuition costs. It was a moment of triumph, not just for Marcus, but for his entire family. James cried tears of joy the day Marcus left for college, knowing his son was stepping into a world far beyond the confines of their humble neighborhood. College wasn't easy, though. For the first time, Marcus found himself surrounded by students from privileged backgrounds, kids who wore designer clothes and drove expensive cars. At first, he felt out of place, unsure if he belonged among such affluence. But instead of letting self-doubt consume him, Marcus channeled his energy into excelling academically. He studied harder than anyone else, determined to prove that intelligence and perseverance mattered more than wealth or connections. During his sophomore year, Marcus discovered his passion for technology. He took a computer programming course on a whim and quickly realized how much he enjoyed creating solutions through code. From developing simple apps to designing intricate algorithms, Marcus thrived in this new world of innovation. His professors noticed his potential and encouraged him to pursue internships at tech companies. These experiences gave Marcus valuable insights into the industry and fueled his ambition to start his own business someday. After graduating with honors, Marcus faced a crossroads. Many of his peers accepted lucrative offers from big corporations, but Marcus had a different vision. He wanted to create something meaningful, something that would leave a lasting impact. So, armed with little more than a laptop and a bold idea, he founded Technova Solutions. The company started small, operating out of Marcus's tiny apartment. But thanks to his relentless drive and innovative ideas, Technova quickly gained traction. Within a few years, it evolved into a powerhouse in Silicon Valley, known for its cutting-edge software and commitment to diversity. As the first Black CEO in his field, Marcus faced unique challenges. There were skeptics who doubted his abilities and competitors who tried to undermine him. Yet, Marcus refused to let negativity derail his progress. Instead, he leaned on the lessons he'd learned growing up, the value of resilience, the importance of staying true to oneself. and the power of believing in your dreams. He surrounded himself with a team of talented individuals who shared his vision, and together, they pushed boundaries and broke barriers. Despite his success, Marcus never forgot where he came from. He often visited his old neighborhood, bringing gifts for families in need and mentoring young students eager to follow in his footsteps. To Marcus, success wasn't just about personal achievement. It was about lifting others up along the way. He believed that everyone deserved a fair shot at pursuing their dreams, regardless of their background. But even as Marcus basked in the glow of his accomplishments, storm clouds loomed on the horizon. Running a company wasn't just about developing groundbreaking products, it also meant managing people. And not everyone shared Marcus's values. Rumors of misconduct and complacency within Teknova began to trickle down to him. Employees whispered about coworkers slacking off, abusing company resources, or treating others poorly. At first, Marcus dismissed these reports as isolated incidents, assuming they'd resolve themselves. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. That's when James stepped in. Watching his son struggle with these issues, James decided it was time to take matters into his own hands. After all, no one understood the importance of integrity and hard work better than him. Little did Marcus know, his father's intervention would lead to revelations that would rock the foundation of Teknova and test Marcus's leadership like never before. James Thompson had always been a man of few words, but his actions spoke louder than any speech ever could. He carried himself with quiet dignity, the kind that came from years of hard work and sacrifice. Retirement had given him time to reflect on life, and while he was proud of what Marcus had achieved, he couldn't ignore the unease growing in his chest. Something about Teknova Solutions didn't sit right with him. It wasn't just the occasional complaints Marcus brought up during their family dinners, how some employees seemed disengaged or disrespectful toward others. It was the way Marcus looked when he talked about it. The spark in his eyes, the same one James had seen since Marcus was a boy tinkering with gadgets, had dimmed slightly. There was frustration there, mixed with exhaustion. James knew his son well enough to recognize that Marcus was carrying a burden he didn't want to share openly. One evening after dinner, James decided to broach the subject. Sitting across from Marcus at the kitchen table, he leaned forward and said, "Son, I've been thinking about this company of yours." Marcus raised an eyebrow, curious. "What about it?" he asked, setting down his coffee mug. James hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "You've built something incredible, Marcus, but I can tell something's bothering you. You don't have to carry all of this alone." Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. For a moment, he considered brushing off his father's concern, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the look in James's eyes, the same unwavering determination that had inspired Marcus throughout his life. "It's not easy," Marcus admitted finally. "Some people, they don't get it. They don't understand what Teknova stands for. What we're trying to build here." James nodded slowly, letting his son continue. Marcus went on to describe the challenges he faced daily. Employees who clocked in late, senior staff members who dismissed interns as if they were beneath them, and even whispers of misconduct during after-hours events. The worst part, Marcus explained, was the sense of betrayal. These were people he had trusted, individuals he had believed shared his vision of innovation and inclusivity. Instead, they treated the company like their personal playground. James listened intently, his jaw tightening with each word. When Marcus finished speaking, there was a long pause. Finally, James spoke, his voice steady and resolute. "Let me help you," he said simply. Marcus blinked, surprised. "Help me? How?" James leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "I'll go undercover," he announced. "No one will suspect me. I'll see firsthand what's really going on." At first, Marcus laughed. The idea of his father sneaking around the office seemed absurd, but as James elaborated, Marcus began to see the merit in the plan. James had spent decades observing people in various workplaces. He knew how to blend in, how to listen without drawing attention to himself, And most importantly, he cared deeply about Technova. Not because of its success, but because of what it represented for Marcus and their family. Still, Marcus hesitated. "Dad, it's risky," he said. "If anyone finds out?" James waved, a hand dismissively. "They won't," he interrupted firmly. "Trust me, son. I've cleaned floors and emptied trash cans my whole life. No one pays attention to people like that. Besides, I'm doing this for you. For us. We didn't come this far to let anyone ruin what you've built." The conviction in James's voice left no room for argument. Reluctantly, Marcus agreed, though he couldn't shake the feeling that he was asking too much of his father. After all, James had already given so much, his sweat, his time, his entire life, for the sake of their family. But James wouldn't hear of it. "This is what fathers do," he said with a smile. "We protect our children no matter what." Over the next few days, James prepared for his new role. With Marcus's help, he secured a temporary position as a security guard at Technova. The job description was vague enough to allow him freedom to move around the office, observe interactions, and gather information without raising suspicion. James borrowed a uniform from a friend who worked in security and practiced walking with the confident stride of someone accustomed to authority. On the morning of his first day, James stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the cap on his head. He barely recognized himself. Gone was the retired janitor with calloused hands and weary eyes. In his place was Mr. Johnson, a stern yet unassuming security guard ready to uncover the truth. As he drove to Technova's headquarters, James felt a mix of nerves and excitement. This wasn't just about helping Marcus. It was about proving that integrity still mattered, even in a world where shortcuts and selfishness often took center stage. When James arrived at the office, he was greeted by a flurry of activity. Employees bustled past him, barely sparing a glance. To them, he was invisible, a fact that suited James perfectly. He began his rounds walking through cubicles and conference rooms, listening to conversations and watching body language. At first, things seemed normal. People typed away on their keyboards, answered phone calls, and attended meetings. But as the hours passed, cracks began to show. In the break room, James overheard two employees gossiping about a co-worker who had recently been promoted. Their tone was mocking, laced with jealousy and disdain. Later, he noticed a group of managers, laughing loudly in a corner, clearly enjoying themselves, but also ignoring urgent emails piling up in their inboxes. By lunchtime, James had already gathered enough evidence to confirm his suspicions. Not everyone at Technova shared Marcus's values. Despite the troubling discoveries, James remained focused. He reminded himself why he was there, to protect his son's legacy and ensure that Technova stayed true to its mission. Each step he took brought him closer to the truth, and with every observation, his resolve grew stronger. James knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. For Marcus, for their family, and for the dream they had fought so hard to achieve, James would stop at nothing to make things right. James Thompson had always been a man of action, not words. His decision to go undercover as a security guard wasn't made lightly, but once he committed, there was no turning back. The morning he stepped into Technova Solutions as Mr. Johnson, he felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. It was like stepping onto a stage where he didn't know the script, but he was determined to play his part convincingly. The disguise itself was simple, yet effective. James borrowed a slightly oversized security uniform from an old friend who worked in private security. The cap rested low on his forehead, casting a shadow over his face, while the badge pinned to his chest gleamed with an air of authority. He walked with purpose, his posture straight and deliberate, mimicking the confident stride of someone who'd been doing this job for years. To complete the transformation, he adopted a gruff demeanor, just stern enough to keep people at arm's length but approachable enough not to raise suspicion. On his first day, James arrived early, just as the sun was beginning to rise. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few cars belonging to the cleaning crew and IT staff prepping for the day ahead. As he entered the building, he nodded curtly at the receptionist, who barely glanced up from her computer. She muttered a quick good morning before returning to her work. James smiled inwardly. Invisibility suited him just fine. His initial task was straightforward: patrol the office floors, monitor activity, and ensure everything ran smoothly. But James had a secondary mission, one that required keen observation and sharp instincts. He began by walking through the maze of cubicles, taking note of how employees interacted with each other. Some greeted him with polite nods, mistaking him for a new hire or temporary worker. Others ignored him completely, too engrossed in their phones or laptops to notice his presence. By mid-morning, the office buzzed with activity. Employees streamed in, clutching cups of coffee and chatting animatedly about weekend plans. James positioned himself near the entrance, pretending to check IDs and log arrivals. From this vantage point, he could see almost everyone who came in, and more importantly, how they behaved. A young intern scurried past him, clearly flustered, while a senior manager sauntered in leisurely, 10 minutes late without so much as an apology. James jotted down mental notes cataloging every detail. As the hours passed, James moved through different areas of the office, blending seamlessly into the background. In the break room, he lingered near the coffee machine, eavesdropping on snippets of conversation. One group of employees complained about workload, blaming their bosses for unrealistic deadlines. Another pair laughed loudly, sharing gossip about a coworker who had recently been promoted. "Can you believe she got that position?" one whispered, rolling her eyes. "She doesn't even know what she's doing." James clenched his jaw but said nothing, filing the exchange away for later reflection. In the afternoon, James ventured into the conference rooms, where meetings were held behind closed doors. Here, the atmosphere shifted. Managers spoke confidently, presenting ideas and strategies with polished professionalism. Yet beneath the surface, James detected cracks in the facade. During one meeting, he noticed a junior employee hesitating to voice her opinion, only to be interrupted by a colleague, who dominated the discussion. When she finally spoke, her suggestion was dismissed with a casual wave of the hand. James watched silently, his heart sinking at the sight of such blatant disregard for teamwork and inclusivity. Later that day, James stumbled upon something far more troubling. While patrolling the executive wing, he heard muffled laughter coming from a nearby conference room. Peering inside, he saw a group of senior staff members gathered around a table laden with food and drinks. Bottles of expensive wine sat uncorked, and plates of gourmet snacks were scattered across the table. They weren't discussing business, they were celebrating, laughing raucously and making jokes at the expense of others. One man raised his glass in a toast, mocking a disabled coworker who had struggled with accessibility issues in the building earlier that week. James's blood boiled, but he forced himself to remain calm. This wasn't the time to confront them, not. Yet throughout the day, James continued his rounds, gathering evidence of behavior that ranged from mildly concerning to outright unacceptable. He observed interns being treated like errand runners, fetching coffee and dry cleaning for higher-ups. He saw managers using company resources for personal gain, booking lavish dinners under the guise of client meetings. And he witnessed countless instances of disrespect, both subtle and overt, directed at those lower on the corporate ladder. Despite the mounting frustration, James remained patient. He reminded himself that his role wasn't to intervene immediately. It was to gather information and present it to Marcus. Each interaction, each observation, brought him closer to understanding the root of the problem. But the weight of what he was uncovering weighed heavily on him. How could a company built on values of innovation and inclusivity harbor such toxicity? It seemed inconceivable, yet here it was, hidden in plain sight. By the end of his first day, James returned home, exhausted but resolute. He recounted the events of the day to Marcus, who listened intently, his expression growing darker with each revelation. "I had no idea," Marcus admitted softly, shaking his head. "How could I have missed all of this?" James placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "You've been focused on running the company, Marcus. You can't see everything. That's why I'm here, to help you." Over the next several days, James settled into his routine, becoming a familiar if unremarkable, fixture in the office. Employees grew accustomed to seeing him patrolling the halls, checking doors, and occasionally asking for directions. No one suspected that the quiet security guard with the piercing gaze was anything more than he appeared. And that was exactly how James wanted it. Each day brought new discoveries, some minor and others deeply unsettling. But James never wavered. He knew the truth was worth uncovering, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. For Marcus, for Teknova, and for the legacy they had worked so hard to build, James would stay the course. His transformation from retired janitor to undercover investigator might have seemed improbable, but it was driven by one simple truth. When it came to protecting his family, James Thompson would stop at nothing. James Thompson's days as Mr. Johnson were far from ordinary. Each morning he arrived at Teknova Solutions with a purpose that went beyond the duties of a typical security guard. Beneath his uniform and stern demeanor lay a man on a mission to uncover the truth about the company his son had poured his heart and soul into building. What James discovered over the next few weeks would shock him to his core. By the second week of his undercover operation, James had become a ghost in the office, present but unseen. Employees moved past him without a second glance, treating him as part of the furniture. To them, he was just another faceless worker tasked with mundane responsibilities. But James didn't mind being overlooked. In fact, it worked perfectly for his plan. The more invisible he was, the more he could observe, and what he observed left him deeply troubled. One of the first major incidents occurred late on a Thursday afternoon. James was patrolling the executive wing when he noticed unusual activity emanating from one of the large conference rooms. Through the partially opened door, he saw several senior managers gathered around a table filled with food, drinks, and even bottles of champagne. At first glance, it appeared to be a casual meeting. But something about the scene felt off. As James lingered nearby, pretending to inspect the hallway lights, he overheard snippets of their conversation. "Who cares if accounting flags this? It's not like anyone checks," one manager said with a smirk, holding up a receipt for an expensive dinner. Another chimed in, laughing. "Besides, we earned it. We're the ones keeping this place running." The group erupted into laughter, clinking glasses and congratulating themselves on their cleverness. James's stomach churned as he realized they were openly discussing how to misuse company funds for personal indulgence. This wasn't just carelessness, it was outright corruption. But the revelations didn't stop there. Later that same evening, James witnessed something even more disturbing. While making his rounds near the IT department, he overheard two employees mocking a disabled coworker who had been struggling with accessibility issues in the building. One of them mimicked the way the coworker walked, exaggerating their movements for comedic effect. The other joined in, laughing cruelly. "Why doesn't he just use the stairs like everyone else?" one remarked, completely oblivious to the fact that the coworker relied on a wheelchair. James clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay silent. He wanted nothing more than to step in and defend the coworker, but he knew he couldn't blow his cover. Not yet. The following day brought another wave of unsettling discoveries. During lunchtime, James positioned himself near the break room, where interns often congregated. He listened as one intern nervously recounted how her supervisor had sent her on multiple errands unrelated to work, picking up dry cleaning, dropping off packages, and even walking the manager's dog. "I don't want to complain," she whispered to a colleague, "but I feel like I'm being treated like a servant instead of an employee." Her friend nodded sympathetically but offered little advice, warning her not to rock the boat if she wanted to keep her internship. These incidents weren't isolated. They were symptoms of a larger problem festering within Teknova Solutions. Over the course of 2 weeks, James documented countless examples of misconduct, ranging from petty grievances to outright abuse of power. Some employees clocked in late and left early, knowing they wouldn't face consequences. Others bullied, their subordinates using intimidation to maintain control. And then there were those who spread toxic rumors, tearing down colleagues to elevate themselves. Perhaps the most shocking moment came during a staff meeting James accidentally stumbled upon. Posing as a security guard conducting routine checks, He stood quietly in the back of the room while a team leader delivered a presentation. At one point, the leader paused to criticize a recent project led by a junior employee. Instead of offering constructive feedback, he mocked the employee's efforts, calling the work amateurish and a waste of time. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. When the junior employee tried to defend herself, the leader cut her off mid-sentence, dismissing her input entirely. James watched as the young woman sank lower in her chair, humiliation written all over her face. As the days passed, James began to piece together a troubling picture of the company culture at Teknova. It wasn't just a handful of bad apples causing problems, it was systemic. There was a lack of accountability, a disregard for teamwork, and an alarming amount of disrespect directed at those perceived as less important. James couldn't help but contrast this reality with Marcus's vision for the company, a workplace built on innovation, inclusivity, and mutual respect. The gap between the dream and the truth was staggering. Despite the mounting frustration, James refused to let his emotions get the better of him. He reminded himself why he was doing this, to protect his son's legacy and ensure that Teknova remained a beacon of hope for others. Every observation, no matter how painful, brought him closer to understanding the root of the issue. By the end of the second week, James had compiled a mental dossier of evidence that painted a damning portrait of the company's internal struggles. On the final day of his undercover stint, James decided to push a little further. He lingered outside the HR department, hoping to catch wind of any formal complaints or reports filed by employees. Sure enough, he overheard a heated discussion between two HR representatives. One expressed frustration at the lack of action taken against repeat offenders, while the other shrugged it off, saying, "It's not our job to police behavior unless someone officially files a grievance." James shook his head in disbelief. Even the systems meant to safeguard employees were failing them. That evening, as James returned home, he felt a mix of exhaustion and resolve. He had seen enough to confirm his worst fears, but he also knew he had the tools to make things right. Sitting across from Marcus at the kitchen table, James recounted everything he had witnessed over the past 2 weeks. His voice was steady, though his eyes betrayed the anger and sadness he felt. Marcus listened intently, his expression growing darker with each revelation. "I can't believe this is happening in my own company," Marcus said finally, his voice trembling with emotion. "How could I have missed it?" James reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "You've been focused on growth and innovation, Marcus. You trusted these people to uphold your values, and they failed you. But now you know the truth, and knowing is the first step toward fixing it." For James, the experience had been eye-opening. He had always believed in the goodness of people, but what he uncovered at Teknova challenged that belief. Still, he held on to hope that Marcus would rise to the occasion, confront the issues head-on, and restore the integrity of the company. After all, this wasn't just about Teknova, it was about setting an example for others to follow. James may have started as a janitor, but now he was playing a crucial role in shaping the future of a business that represented so much more than profit margins. The day James Thompson revealed his true identity at Teknova Solutions was one that no employee would ever forget. It began like any other morning. Employees shuffled into the office, grabbing coffee and settling into their desks as the hum of keyboards and chatter filled the air. But by mid-morning, an unexpected staff meeting was called. Everyone was required to attend, from interns to senior executives. The tension in the room was palpable. Whispers rippled through the crowd as people wondered what could possibly warrant such an urgent gathering. Marcus stood at the front of the conference room, his expression unreadable. Beside him stood James, still wearing his security guard uniform, but with a quiet confidence that commanded attention. For weeks, employees had passed James in the hallways without giving him a second thought, dismissing him as just another faceless worker. Now, all eyes were on him, curiosity mingling with unease. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was calm but firm. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "This meeting is long overdue." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. "Over the past few weeks, I've become aware of some troubling behaviors within our company. Things that go against everything Technova stands for. Integrity, respect, teamwork. His gaze swept across the room, locking briefly with several individuals who shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Then, Marcus gestured toward James. What I'm about to share didn't come from me directly. It came from someone who's been watching closely, listening carefully, and observing everything that happens here. Someone who cares deeply about this company and its future. At this point, James stepped forward, removing his cap to reveal his familiar face. Gasps erupted throughout the room as realization dawned on everyone. The unassuming security guard they'd ignored for weeks was none other than Marcus's father. James wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. With a steady voice, he recounted everything he had witnessed during his undercover stint. He started with the smaller infractions, the tardiness, the lack of respect shown to interns, and the misuse of company resources. As he spoke, heads bowed in shame and murmurs of disbelief spread among the employees. Some tried to laugh it off, assuming James was exaggerating or misunderstanding certain situations. But James wasn't finished. He moved on to the more serious offenses, detailing the private parties held in conference rooms complete with expensive meals and alcohol charged to the company account. He described how senior managers mocked disabled coworkers and bullied junior staff members. When he mentioned the specific incident involving the disabled employee struggling with accessibility issues, a hush fell over the room. That story hit particularly hard because many employees knew exactly who James was referring to. A kind and hard-working individual who deserved better treatment than they had given him. James didn't mince words. "Let me be clear," he said, his tone unwavering. "These actions are unacceptable. They disrespect not only your colleagues but also the values this company was built upon. You work for a business that prides itself on innovation and inclusivity, yet some of you have created a toxic environment where people feel undervalued and disrespected." As James spoke, Marcus watched the reactions unfold. Some employees looked genuinely remorseful, while others appeared defensive, crossing their arms and avoiding eye contact. A few even glanced around nervously, wondering if their own behavior had been noted. Marcus felt a mix of emotions: anger at the betrayal, sadness for those affected, and determination to make things right. When James finished speaking, the room was silent. No one dared to interrupt or argue. Finally, Marcus took a step forward, addressing the group directly. "I founded this company with a vision," he said, his voice tinged with emotion. "A vision of creating a workplace where everyone feels valued, where ideas are celebrated, and where we lift each other up instead of tearing each other down. What my father has uncovered proves that we've strayed far from that vision." Marcus paused, scanning the room once more. "But today marks a turning point. We can either continue down this path of complacency and selfishness, or we can choose to change, to rebuild trust, to hold ourselves accountable. And yes," he added, his tone hardening slightly, "there will be consequences for those who refuse to align with our values." The gravity of Marcus's words hung in the air. Employees exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that this wasn't just a lecture, it was a warning. Some began to sweat, fearing they might be singled out next. Others nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in Marcus's message. Whatever the case, it was clear that nothing would be the same after this moment. James stepped back, allowing Marcus to take the lead. "Starting now," Marcus continued, "we're implementing new policies to ensure accountability. Anonymous reporting systems will be put in place so anyone can raise concerns without fear of retaliation. Regular audits will monitor workplace and conduct, and leadership roles will be reevaluated based on performance and integrity, not just seniority." He then delivered the part everyone had been dreading: immediate action. Without hesitation, Marcus announced the termination of several high-ranking executives implicated in the worst offenses. Their names echoed through the room, leaving stunned silence in their wake. One by one, these individuals were escorted out of the building, their careers at Technova ending in disgrace. For the remaining staff, it was a sobering reminder that no one was above reproach. not even those in positions of power. To further emphasize the seriousness of the situation, Marcus outlined additional measures. Employees involved in lesser infractions were placed on probation, required to attend mandatory training sessions on ethics and teamwork. Promotions would now prioritize merit and alignment with company values over tenure or connections. Those who had previously gone unnoticed, hardworking individuals overlooked du smoget,